What is the difference between sweeping your rod and stop and go with your reel when you're fishing a crankbait? Good morning, guys and girls. January 30, and yes, we are still in New York City. We'll tell you a little bit more about that a little later on, maybe tomorrow. In January 30, we're looking in Genesis, first book of the Bible, Genesis 22:8. These are famous words right here. Abraham said, "My son, my God, will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering." My son, God will provide for himself a lamb for the burnt offering. One of the statements that we hear a lot of folks say as we fish with is, "Don't worry about it, don't worry about it. I have an ace in the hole." Particularly, we hear that a lot from fishing guides. Don't worry, I have an ace in the hole. This usually happens after a few hours without too much success. We tell people right off the bat when we fish with them, hey, if you got an ace in the hole, let's go to that ace in the hole first. Don't save it. Let's go there right now. Abraham had an ace in the hole, his God, and his great belief in that God. Asked to sacrifice his son, he obeyed. And when his son Isaac asked, "Where's the lamb to be sacrificed?" "Dad, where's the lamb to be sacrificed?" Abraham spoke these famous words in today's verse. A critical point to think about, and this is really something when you think about it, a critical point is that Isaac was around 25 years old when this happened, and he agreed with his father that God would provide. He wasn't a little 5 or 6 year old boy that his father could move around. He's a 25-year-old strapping young man. He allowed Abraham, his very, very old father, to tie him up and place him on the wood to be sacrificed. So Isaac had an awful lot of belief as well. And God did come through with a ram for the sacrifice instead of Isaac. Whatever you are believing for, God has the power to provide. God has the power to provide. Faith like Abraham, pretty difficult, especially when he was asked to give his son Isaac. Here's our tip for today. It's hard to read on that. Often a sweep and pulse with your rod tip will trigger crankbait strikes. We got here in this new book, we got some of the tips especially are very, very small, and they're not really contrasting colors. That's not a complaint, that's just an action. Often a sweep with your rod tip when you're fishing a crankbait will trigger a strike. When we're talking about sweeping a crankbait, of course we've talked about for many, many times, I've said often that one of the best ways to fish a crankbait is to stop and go, stop and go. Don't ever just throw it out and wind it in. Stop and go, pause, do something. In other words, make that crankbait act erratically. When you're sweeping your rod, you're not using the stop and go technique. You're winding and you're sweeping your rod tip and then moving your rod tip back toward your bait. And you pick up the slack line as you move it back. So when you sweep your rod, you're stopping your crank, but you're moving it faster. And then as you move it back, you're either going to let it sit there if it's a suspended crankbait, or float back up to the top if it's a floater. Or if it's a sinking crankbait, like a Lucky Strike Mimic, that bait is actually going to start falling a little bit, and it'll fall straight down. Oftentimes, that action in any of the above baits creates a strike. So when you're out there fishing a crankbait, lots of different things you can do. Probably the worst is just throw it out there and crank it back in. Although, that'll catch fish too. Guys and girls, go out there and have you a great one today. And remember, I sure do love you.